of the emergency budget 2020-2021. So if I can have officers at the table for that, thank you very much. And also not only to welcome our council officers, but the Tupuna Monga Authority, Paul Majuri, Dominic Wilson and Nick Turoa. Haere mai. And I will put the motion to adopt the emergency budget. I will move that. Councillor Simpson, can I ask you to second that, please? I was just about to put the motion and then I realised, no, we need to discuss that first. It's a rather important item of the agenda. There are a number of different parts to our resolution today, and the first is to agree to the Tupuna Monga Authority operational plan and the summary of the Tupuna Monga Authority operational plan. I'm conscious that the chair of the authority, Paul Majuri, needs to get away, so I'm going to suggest that could we just in the first part of our question and discussions deal with the Tupuna Monga Authority operational plan. So if I can open that up for, I think we can do questions and comments together. We've workshopped this yesterday and the emergency budget, and we've workshopped the emergency budget for 50 hours. So I'm not presuming that we'll want to have 21 speeches around it, either of those things today, but we do need to have the opportunity for questions and any comments. So just looking first of all at the adoption of the operational plan for the TMA, are there any councillors wanting to ask questions or to make comments? Councillor Filipaina.
Just comments, if that's okay, Your Worship.
That's fine, thank you, Councillor.
Look, I want to acknowledge our Tupuna Monga Authority staff in regards to the operational plan, but also the actual committee itself. The reason I say that, Your Worship, is because one, when this was brought to the Tupuna Monga Authority Committee, it was passed unanimously across the table with our elected members and with mana whenua. Your Worship, I think, and this is not going to be a long sort of comment, but I think two things that need to be put in front of everybody. One is the fact that the Tupuna Monga Authority decided to take cuts themselves, independent of council. They decided that this is what we will be doing to put forward. I want to acknowledge them in regards to that. They also did an independent consultation process with our community, and I know that some councillors around this particular table asked questions around some of the changes that were there, and the answer was sent through to them. So, Your Worship, I just want to acknowledge our rangatira, Paul Majuri, our chair on that committee, who has, since I've been there as deputy chair, carried all our votes. And I mean, I remember before I got onto the Tupuna Monga Authority is that decisions are made by consensus, which is, you know, something we as a governing body and other committees should take on board. So look, to our rangatira that are here, ngā mihi ki a koe, kia koutou katoa, and just to say thank you, Your Worship. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Councillor Filipaina. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship, and notwithstanding the voluntary 5% cut that the TMA have volunteered, understanding the situation for the council at this time, I have a real difficulty in supporting this, because this is our only opportunity with the ratepayers' funds that go into the Tupuna Monga Authority to register my concern that of the 176 submissions that were received, 139 did not support single stage tree felling. And while I support the long-term objectives, in an operational sense, I feel that the canopy that is provided, particularly on Wairaka, is providing a lot of support for in an environmental and ecological sense. And this is my only way of registering my concern in terms of the detail of that operational plan. So as we discussed yesterday, it's a sort of all or nothing thing. So I have to say at this point, I cannot support this, that the vast majority of submitters asked for changes. There's been, as far as I can determine, very little, indeed none, that I can identify change to the operational plan, and for that reason I will not be supporting this today.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. I take that as a comment rather than a question needing to be answered. Are there any other comments or questions from around the table on just on the Tupuna Monga Authority? Yes, Councillor Walker.
Well, I just want to support the comments that Councillor Fletcher made. I have a similar view. That is not to say that I'm not supportive of a phase change over time to native vegetation on the Monga, but in my view, the existing vegetation forms an important role, certainly in terms of retaining carbon, and that meets our climate change objectives, and it provides incredibly valuable habitat for both native wildlife and exotics. And I believe that succession planting over time, which is a generally accepted ecological principle, is far better than just blanket logging and replacement with very, very young natives that will have a very high death rate over the dry summers that we have. So I have a very real concern there, and I share the comments that Councillor Fletcher made. And this, again, is my only way also of registering that concern. And I have visited the Monga.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Worship. Just on this I just want councillors to be really sure that they have directly spoken to the Tupuna Monga Authority about monga that may be in their backyard. I mean, I've heard Councillor Fletcher, but I asked a question yesterday and I followed it up in writing. There are no felling of exotics on a henny-rail, Mount Hobson, this year. And to that end, that makes me happy to support the plan. I mean, I just make sure that you know exactly what's going on in the monga that is in your backyard. That's what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I put recommendation A, I just want to check that there are no further comments or questions. Councillor Hills.
No, just a brief comment. Definitely support it. Everyone has their right to have their say, obviously, but I am concerned that we have been through this a number of times. These maunga have, through treaty settlement, been given back to iwi. We have a say in that, we feed back into it, but as a tree council, as many iwi, as Ngāti Whātua, as others have come to us and said, we are tired of being told what to do on the small, tiny bits of land that iwi were given back or negotiated back over hundreds of years of stolen land. So I think, yep, we can all have our opinion, but my opinion is that it's would be a concerning space if we start withholding budget because we do not like what is legally allowed to be done through a process and through consultation and through feedback to restore and revegetate the maunga to native forests that iwi see as they always should have been.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Any further comment? Councillor Coon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. E te rangatira, Paul, tēnā koe, kia ora koutou. I would just like to offer my acknowledgement of the work of the Tupuna Monga Authority, and I have just been so impressed with everything that you're doing. I just absolutely love the tihi without vehicles polluting the air and just seeing how it's just really changed the whole environment. I really want to acknowledge your authority around implementing operational plans that you have put a lot of consideration into. And I feel that around this table, this isn't the time for us to be trying to unpick those plans because I know a huge amount of consideration has gone into them. And just to see the way in which there's a whole new approach to managing the monga. In every interaction I've had and experience of visiting, it's just been positive. And to see the new signage, the new trails, to go to Faux Cafe, to see the exhibition there. I mean, it's just all a really, all Aucklanders are benefiting from your governance over Monga. So I'd like to just add my thanks to that and feel that we should all around this table really get behind the operational plan and acknowledge this is our opportunity to acknowledge your authority and your governance. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion. Thank you, and of course it has my wholehearted support. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further comments? Otherwise, I'll just make a short concluding comment myself. I grew up in an area called Three Kings, and the Three Kings represented the three volcanic cones that once existed in that area. One is left, and that one has got a reservoir on top of it, Pukita Papa, and the other area of my former electorate has a reservoir built into it. And over a century and a half, we did enormous damage to what really is part of the taonga of Tamaki Makaurau. And first of all, I want to acknowledge that the ownership of the monga have been handed back to the 13 iwi. So they are now the owners, but the provision of the legislation is that they will hold ownership on behalf of all iwi and all of the people of our city. I think some excellent things have happened with the monga. We are incredibly blessed as a city that we have across our landscape these areas that have not been built on and that can be open space held for the benefit of all Aucklanders in perpetuity. So I want to thank the Monga Authority for its stewardship of those mounts. There is controversy, of course, around whether the exotic trees should be cleared at once or in stages. There's a matter before the court in regard to Wairaka, and I don't want to get into that. But once that matter has been dealt with, there is room for further discussion. And I would encourage people to engage, and I would also stand out against those that are exploiting the difference of opinion, which in many cases is genuine, over the removal of trees, with an underlying element of prejudice against the iwi ownership of the monga. And I regret some of the things that have happened at Wairaka, and if you read some of the Facebook postings and you see some of the slogans that have been daubed, there is no room, in my view, in Tamaki Makaurau for that sort of prejudice and outright abuse and irrationality. So let's deal with issues as they arise. There will always be issues that arise. There will be differences of opinion genuinely held, but we should have zero tolerance to some of the racism that has underlined some of the activity of those that are opposed to what the Tupuna Monga Authority and the Trust is doing. I have had a division requested on this issue, so I'm going to ask Sandra to call for a vote by division on agreeing to the operational plan, which is recommendation A, as part of the adoption of our emergency budget. Sandra.
Councillors, you're voting on Clause A as you see it on the screen. Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
Absolutely support. Yes.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Coon.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
Or.
Councillor Dalton.
Aye.
Councillor Darby,
For.
Councillor Filipina,
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher,
Against.
Councillor Henderson,
For.
Councillor Hills,
Aye, thank you.
Councillor Mulholland,
For.
Councillor Newman, Councillor Sayers, Councillor Simpson,
For.
Councillor Stewart,
For.
Councillor Walker,
Against for the reasons I indicated earlier.
Councillor Watson,
Yep.
Councillor Young. That's carried 19 votes to 2.
So that is, I declare that carried 19 votes to 2. And can I just thank the Tupuna Monga Authority both for being here again today and for the work that you're doing. Right, councillors, we now come to the other resolutions that are before us in terms of adopting the emergency budget. We have debated this issue now over a period of 7 months. And with the emergency budget that we have in front of us, we've put 50 hours into our workshopping of the issues. So I don't anticipate that everybody will want to discuss at length the issues that we have already agreed upon by majority vote and discussed. But there nevertheless is the opportunity for members to raise questions and to make comments. So I think I'll run those two sections together because I don't anticipate this it will necessarily be prolonged. I may be wrong. So any councillor wishing to speak to recommendations B on adopting the budget and C, which is simply the normal delegation of authority for minor editorial changes. Okay, the floor is open. Councillor Walker.
So I'm just making the assumption that this is both questions and speaking, that's
Yes,
correct?
that's correct, Councillor.
Okay, so the particular concern that I've indicated earlier is that our budget also includes effectively the budget of Watercare. Auckland is experiencing a drought and issues around water. I regard that as a wonderful opportunity, if this council was mindful, to actually make considerable savings that go to carbon emissions. And I say that because the carbon that is inherent in water is huge. On the part of Watercare, it amounts to 670,000 gigajoules of energy per year, so this is immense. It also includes a significant amount of latent energy over and above that. So if there is a single thing that this council wants to do something about emissions, one of the things that we can do is encourage Aucklanders to conserve. On my part, I've put up a whole range of options to Watercare, quite specifically around how they could do that. Some of those things go to the earlier experience of the water crisis back in 93, 94. I remain very concerned that this council still has, after the notice of motion that myself and Councillor Watson put on the, I think the 5th or 6th of June for urgent action around this issue, that we have still had no report back to a committee of council, or for that matter the governing body, around what council is actually doing around this issue. No reporting to us around the savings that Auckland Council is making as the biggest single user of water in the region as a business. Quite obviously, we've had some workshops. Consequently, I do not think that the budget provision that Watercare have of the order of 50 million is sufficient to cover the drop in revenue that would be expected in the short term to actually enact a full-on campaign to save water and to sustain that into the future for the reasons of saving carbon. So I have a real concern around that. I want to put that on the table. And the other concern that I have is that I believe that the other budgets, those for regional facilities and Panuku, contain items that I would suggest are imprudent for us to fund, especially around some of the funding on RFA's part that goes to stadiums against a background where we know our international visitor numbers are dropping significantly, and also as it goes to Panuku, investments in areas against a background where there is, I would suggest, a depressed market that goes to apartments and also commercial building. And I've registered those issues before. So for that reason, I have a concern around the emergency budget.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Coon.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a point of clarification. You'll be pleased to know I don't intend to embark on another speech or round of thank yous. But in terms of, I just want to know if this is me not being able to find the documents. But on the agenda, it says that the documents would be circulated before the meeting, and I can't find them on Nexus or on Info Council, the actual emergency budget documents. So just wanted to know when they're going to be uploaded and available.
Okay, I'm just advised that they're on Nexus under workshop from yesterday because of the same documents, and they're also emailed. So
Yeah, I've got that. I'm just asking for, from a public-facing perspective, how do we share what we're resolving on right now?
I understand, I'm being informed that they will be uploaded for public consumption. These are now public documents. But thank you for raising that issue. Right, we have Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to recognise that this is an extremely difficult time for New Zealand, and it's an extremely difficult time for the Auckland Council. But I have and want to express again today the concern that I've got in the way in which we have been at times wanting to blame Watercare for where the council situation is at. Watercare is self-funding and is fully funded in their 10-year funding plan, including allowances for events like the current drought. The Watercare balance sheet, as we know, has sufficient capacity to take on more debt, and that customers should not need necessarily to pay more by way of rates. I don't want to talk about the rates issue because I think that's for a subsequent item. But what I do want to say is that I think there is public confusion about the role of Watercare. And while on page 81 of the documents that we looked at yesterday, this discussion about Watercare's drought-related debt mitigation, I think the public have a right to know that this in itself is not a justification on the rating issue. And I think that's been further compounded with the letter. Thank you for sending it through, Your Worship, this morning. In your letter, you talk about after we went up for consultation on the budget, we secured further water supplies, etc. But they require a further 239 million, which we have had to add into our budget. I think that that is somewhat confusing and misleading for the public. But again, I recognise all the work that's done. I recognise that today is not a time for long speeches, but I do want to register my concern that Watercare has been painted as the bogey in this one. And I think that there were other things that we could have done in recognising the extent of the problems without attacking, it seemed to me, what is one of our best performing CCOs, notwithstanding the issue about remuneration, but in terms of Watercare's own governance and ongoing operational issues. So I welcome the work that you're doing with central government to help us on that debt mitigation issue, but I do feel that we have been somewhat unfair in the way that these issues have been presented to the public.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Casey.
There's not a lot of joy in the budget, as we've all recognised over recent weeks and months, but there's three small things we did on budget day that I want to refer to right now. And the feedback I've received since budget day has been positive on those three things. And the first is restoring the hours to the libraries. I think everybody in Auckland thinks that's a wonderful thing to have done. It's great. The other thing is giving back the LDI to local boards. Again, that's where the rubber hits the road. The most contact with the people of Auckland are through the local boards and local projects. But the final thing, and it was a promise that you made, Mr. Mayor, was to pay our cleaners a living wage. And they're here today to congratulate us all. And some of the cleaners are here. The cleaners who actually clean our toilets in the town hall will now be paid fairly. And I thank you for that, and I thank all the people in this room, and I'd like to see it carried through this budget unanimously today, because it's a great thing to do.
Thank you, Councillor Casey, and can I acknowledge those from the Living Wage Movement at the back of the room. And I think as a group collectively, we're proud of the fact that notwithstanding the huge challenges in front of us in this budget, we have retained the commitment that we have made that in this term of this council, our cleaners, contracted staff, but nevertheless working in council, will get the living wage in full. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your presentations to us over various times, and thank you for your commitment to that cause. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor Goff, and maybe it was a debating point, but could we have a clarification on the Watercare issue? Because it was mentioned that it was self-funding and it didn't need to come out of our budget, but that is because it's a debt-funded issue, we have to provide the debt room to fund that 239 million. Watercare are finding 120, but we are having to find the other half of the funding. So could we just, I know they're self-funding, but because it's capital, it's our budget that has to be affected to help them fit into the debt room this year. Can I have an answer on that? Because that was a bit confusing.
So I could I can make a very brief comment, but the officials might like to add to it. The fact is that the debt that Watercare.
Could I just say that maybe the better of the staff to answer is?
Yeah. I just want to make one point on it. The debt that Watercare borrows comes on our books and affects our debt to revenue ratio, and every councillor around this table understands that we've been struggling to keep that rise in debt to revenue ratio because of COVID-19 below 290%. So that added a bit of a shock to our budget and ensured that we needed to raise more revenue to enable us to keep at no higher than 290% for the following year. But Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, just through the chair. The comment is correct that Watercare is self-funding over the long term. The question is whether Watercare had balance sheet capacity, and in Auckland Council we have a group balance sheet, so there's no question of whether an individual CCO or the parent has their own balance sheet capacity. The capacity is always a group question, and that's where the challenge has been at a group level.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything? Now, I reserve the right to reply at the end, but Councillor Greg Sayers, if you do wish to speak, can you please indicate to me reasonably soon, because we've got no other speakers on the list other than I think Councillor Hills. Have you wanting to? No. Okay. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple of constructive comments. The first one, the document in terms of revenue line. The document we went out to, there was a deficit there of about 600 million compared down to 350 odd million now, so that's terrific. And I'm just hoping that during the term, Your Worship, we have a chance to revisit that, and hopefully with positive news. We've taken our best assumptions around that, and whether we've got a V coming out or something else might go wrong that's unexpected as well. So I just want to acknowledge that, and also the fact that we will have a chance to keep reviewing that throughout this emergency year. And on the expenditure side, just I think who's accountable at the end of the day? It's probably us sitting around this table. So we just need to remain vigilant around ensuring that those budgets that we set are met. And that's really talking to the acting chief executive there as well on behalf of the parent, and certainly to Mr. Stabback when he comes in around the parent, just trying to stick to those figures because we haven't got the best reputation as organisation. We can set the budgets, but we're not always meeting them. And even just our employee benefits is a controllable one, still 8 million, above where we thought we would be this quickly into the LTP, even though I acknowledge that's down from 21. Right, it's just a vigilance around that, Your Worship, that I want to highlight today, and happy to support the recommendation as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very quickly, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge Living Wage Aotearoa who are here. Just as the chair of the Living Wage Advisory Group, which is a humble honour to be involved with. Once we pass this, this will go to that group where Living Wage Aotearoa and staff will work towards implementation, and I'm very proud of that. And I just wanted to acknowledge you guys for your attendance, and thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Councillor Simpson to take the second to last call as the chair of the Finance and Performance Committee, but I don't want to omit anybody else that wants to ask a question or speak. I've got no other interest indicated there. Councillor Hills?
Yeah, I'll just talk briefly. It's, I guess for me, this obviously for all of us was and is probably the worst and hardest plan and decision-making process we've probably ever been through. I guess when we still, there's still a lot of confusion out there that we haven't made the hard decisions. I'd say $120 million worth of savings is a pretty hard decision. I'd say our local areas that will notice the cuts is a hard decision. I'd say hundreds of millions of dollars worth of delayed capital is a hard decision. I'd say 600 staff who already do not have work with us anymore is a hard decision. I'd say potentially up to or over 500 of our current staff that may lose their jobs and will likely lose their jobs through the budget process. I'd say that was a hard decision. I'd say the negotiations right now on freezing pay for a year, working with the unions and others, that is going to be a hard decision. There are a lot of things we will not and cannot do because of the significant reduction in our revenue due to the pandemic. There is going to be up to $200 million worth of sales of assets. I know many of us don't want to do that, but we do not have much of a choice in this situation unless we want to put up rates another 11% to cover that $200 million shortfall. So there's lots of things that are difficult, but I will say it is fantastic that we are, there will be no effects to libraries, that our local boards were clear and around keeping their discretionary budgets at 100%. And the councillors who worked hard to get that over the line is fantastic. And the fact we increased the transport, the community safety budgets, the fact that there won't be the cuts to public transport that originally were proposed, the fact we're still building almost $2.5 billion worth of capital and keeping those jobs going and working with the government on shovel-ready is quite amazing compared to what maybe we thought 3 months ago. The fact that we are able to pay a living wage and work towards paying our cleaners a living wage and that keep that process going is pretty amazing. The fact we're keeping in some of the climate change policies is pretty amazing because there is no delay to climate change. So I guess there's a lot of people out there still saying we didn't make any hard decisions. It is extremely difficult what we are leaving the management and CEO and everyone to deal with after we pass this budget. But I think there's heaps of very good things in there we've managed to say, but it is extremely difficult. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My comments will be short. I just wanted to acknowledge the living wage folk as well. I was on the phone with one of them last night and forgot that fellow would be here. But it's so good to see the living wage movement folk here. And I just wanted to reflect on, over the last week or so, I've had a number of people come up to me when I'm at the library or the pools in Otahu, and they've been really direct about how they feel about the emergency budget, and especially because I live in Otahu, and that's had the effect of not getting, or the deferment of the development area. But I think people have really reflected on how difficult a decision it has been for people around this table. So it's good because, you know, the pool is such that it's not over my head, so no one can try and drown me for the decision that I made. But I think people acknowledge that 3.5%, especially in our area, was a tough call, and they've congratulated Councillor Filipaina as well, who hasn't come walking with me in the pool, but that's all right. I always get lapped by people who are well older than me too. But on that, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to reflect on something slightly different. In that last week, I joined Desley Simpson. I was going to call her Councillor Desley Simpson, but she was wearing a different hat and had come in her capacity as chair of a charitable trust to make a truckload donation to a group to Māngere Budgeting Services. And we, in that, I hope it's all right me mentioning this, but we met some people who were helping to put the food parcels together who'd been laid off from Air New Zealand. And it was freezing that day, but there was a joy and a happiness about them because they were contributing, and they were wearing the hardship of having lost their jobs during the COVID period, but were volunteering for another community group to help out. And I think that sums up a lot of our community. They acknowledge that it's tough going, but everyone's really throwing themselves together and supporting where possible. So I was grateful for the donation of the trust. I know that Daryl was really grateful too. And I'm grateful that there are people whom I know here from the Living Wage as well, who support so many of the people in my area in Manukau who are trying really hard to make ends meet. So to the councillors around this table, to the staff, thank you for everyone's desire to do the best for Auckland. It is tough, and we've seen it firsthand, but I know that we're going to get through this if we just, you know, we'll let people talk to us. I'll let people bite my ear off at the pool while I'm walking with them and I can't hide from them. But I think it's important that people feel like they can have a say too. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and for your acknowledgement of the good work that's being done out in the community there as well. Okay, if there are no other calls, I'll ask Desley Simpson as the Chair of the Finance Committee to make the penultimate call, and then I'll make some brief comments to conclude.
Oh, thank you, Worship, and I'm not going to give a big long speech, but I think sort of following on from Councillor Casey, I wanted to highlight some of the positives in a negative, really. I mean, it is an emergency budget, and I suppose I just want to, having, you know, had a bit of time out in the community, talking to people, I just did want to highlight a couple of things. This year, we will be delivering 12 times the original savings budget. Now, that's huge. That's the biggest savings budget we have ever delivered in this council. And just to put it into context, that's 80 million more than Dunedin City Council's capital expenditure program, or 30 million more than Tauranga's. It's a lot of money. Or more than three times the direct costs for funding all of our 55 libraries. It's a lot of money. And Patricia, you and your team, you know, it's going to be a big challenge. The other thing is debt. I think we have struck a really good place with debt. Debt made me very nervous throughout the workshops, but I'm in a good place with it, and I feel good as a grandmother that we're not loading generations behind me on that debt, because we have left it in a good place. The sale of non-strategic assets, you know, Richard's right, it's going to be challenging, but we do need to do that. But more importantly, with the assets that we have, we can look to the private sector to get more income from the assets we own, like car parking, and give us another income stream from them. That's all part of the asset recycling program. It's not just selling stuff. Staff cuts, look, that's tough, isn't it? You know, it is tough. It's tough to let anyone go. But we have reduced staff budget, the staff budget that we're responsible for, that Patricia and that we are actually responsible for, has gone down 23 million. 23 million reduction in staff costs in the parent. So when people talk about staff, that's what we've gone down here. I think, you know, ratepayers are still struggling to understand some of our decisions, so I want to highlight two things that have gone up. And I suppose the question I had asked yesterday, I'll ask and answer as part of my comment today. And that is, everything in this budget that has gone up will have a note as to why. All right? Because sadly, having cut all sorts of things, there are a couple of areas that have gone up. And I want to deal with them because, 101, politics is to front foot things that don't always look right, but there is obviously a tangible reason for it. And one is the increase in our total and direct operational expenditure. That's gone up. And people say, how come you're putting up rates, you're doing less, but it's costing more? Well, that's actually not right. I think it's important to separate pre-COVID and now. Look, our city has grown the size of Hamilton in the last 7 years. So of course we have to provide more services for more people, and that costs more. But we've got an ambitious capital program, and of course to do that, it costs more too. So I'm just sort of fronting it, that those costs have gone up. And Watercare, and I know, look, Councillor, it's not the bogey, but they are part of our group issue. They've acquired new technology subsidiary, and they've ramped up to supply services to the Waikato. They're going outside of just of Auckland, and that costs money. That's an increase in expenditure as well. So it's obviously offset by funding streams, but on a budget book, it shows as an increase. So at the end of the day, though, we still had $200 million less. Sorry, even though we found $200 million of savings, we've still had a huge cut in our income. And it won't balance as well as we would like it to balance any other year. I want to go back to staff again. So I've talked about the cut in our parent, but actually from the group, pre-COVID, those staff costs were going to go up 74 million, and post-COVID, they are going down 75. All right, so that's in the group. But look, it does challenge us, doesn't it, a crisis? And what I'm really proud of is the way, Patricia, you and the team have handled efficiency. You are basically restructuring our organisation to be smaller and more efficient, to be leaner and better. And that's a positive thing. We need to address that positively. And, maybe if we didn't have COVID, we could have maybe not been as efficient. So I think that's really good as well. But I think there's one big thing that we haven't done very well, and that's telling our story. Look, I don't think local government tells its story very good anyway, but I think that the thing that we've failed to do is explain to Aucklanders why zero was never going to work in the first place. And then when you had the two options, we didn't explain all the good stuff we were doing to get to a place where this budget has landed. So I think we absolutely need to do better with that. He waka aka noa shouldn't just apply now, nor should Team Auckland. Yeah. We should keep doing better and take it further. But I think we've landed in the best place we could, considering. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Simpson, and thank you for the other members that have also contributed, and thank you very much for those that restrained themselves from contributing, because you have done so in the past. I do want to acknowledge Councillor Simpson for chairing those endless workshops. Endless not meaning meaningless. They were inclusive, they were collaborative, and we reached our decision making in a collective way, including with the local boards. And the local boards, all 21 of them, have supported our 3.5% rate increase. That is, according to the local board chairs, the first time ever that there has been unanimity in the local boards, because they understood that with the loss of $450 million out of our budget because of COVID-19, largely through non-rates revenue, to lose what would have been another 86 million in capital and in OPEX would have cut deeply into the services that were important to those local communities. I do want to touch just briefly on water, because Councillors Walker and Fletcher raised it. Demand management is going to be important, Councillor Walker, and we had a workshop yesterday and we explored a range of different things that we have to do. But before we beat ourselves up too much, if I recall my figures correctly, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, the litres per person per day in Auckland consumed is 157. Now, the figure I have in mind was 260 average across the country. I think that was right. Does that mean to say that we're doing better than the rest of the country? Yes. Does that mean that we can't do any better? The answer is no. We will continue to manage our water in a more effective way, and that requires some demand management techniques beyond just the restrictions that we put on in time of drought. In terms of Councillor Fletcher and Watercare, there was a study done of all the water supplier organisations across New Zealand by the Scottish Water Commission, and they found by a country mile, Auckland had the best services provided to any city or region of this country by a long way. By 60%, was it ahead of Wellington, which was second best.
Yeah.
And so I want to acknowledge that in Watercare. But in the same way, have Watercare done everything well, and have they and we planned strategically enough? And the answer is no. We are now in a situation maybe of a 1 in 200 year drought, but because of climate change, maybe a 1 in 10 year drought, in which case we have to make some big changes. And we are now working collectively, and Watercare, I think, has taken a much more open position than in the past to embrace Council's involvement from Healthy Waters and through our new person appointed to deal with strategy for water. And we will find a way through this. But did that 224 million in capital and 16 million and 15 million in OPEX hammer our budget? The answer is yes, because we were working really hard on that debt to revenue ratio, and suddenly we had another spending of nearly $250 million in capex, and that caused us to re-examine what we needed to do in the rest of our budget. You cannot ignore the fact that we are bringing forward that expenditure into this year as having had a dramatic impact on top of COVID-19. Now, there are two things that, one thing I want to comment on was also Councillor Hills. He's quite right. For those on the outside that say you haven't taken any pain, you haven't made any cuts, that is patently inaccurate. It's wrong. In fact, it's dishonest. We will lose around 1,000 staff members, 1 in 6. The first tranche of over 600 being temp and contract workers, the others being permanent full-time positions. And that really does hurt. There is nobody around this table that feels easy about the fact that good people have and will be losing their jobs. But clearly, with the loss of nearly $500 million in income, we need to be a leaner and a more adaptable organisation to do more with less, and that's what we're doing. And Councillor Simpson, you were quite correct in pointing out the savings that we're making this year are way above any other year. And that means that we will be trimming some of our services. It means that on the edge, and only on the edge, we will be reducing our capital investment. But what I believe, while Councillor Casey is quite right, there isn't joy in making those cuts. There isn't joy. But what we can be proud of is what we have retained, what we have sustained, and we have kept those vital services. 250,000 each week use our libraries, 250,000 Aucklanders, and we have fully sustained our investment in that service and in a range of other services. When we look at the capital investment, is there a better time to invest in capital works than at the start of a recession where people are losing their jobs everywhere and where we deeply need to keep our construction industry going so that when we're ready with having emerged from the COVID-19 recession, that industry is in good shape to keep that work going. This time last year, we're saying the area was so overwhelmed with work, our costs were going up too quickly, and we couldn't get the skilled workers, we couldn't get the material to do some of these capital projects, and yet we all know there's a backlog of capital investment in construction work around the city that's been there for a decade, that's led to traffic congestion, that's led to environmental damage, that's led to housing shortage and unaffordability. I think we can be really proud that the budget that was going to be $2.7 billion for capital investment pre-COVID is now $2.57 billion, slightly down, but way up on the $1.6 billion that we invested on average in each of the last 5 years. And I do commend to the public, and councillors will be familiar with this, but in our emergency budget document, just have a look at some of the stuff on transport. You know, Councillors Stewart and Young, 145 million going into the Eastern Busway and planning for the Botany and Manukau connections. We look at what's happening in the city centre, $54 million going in there in areas, urban cycleways, you know, another 49 million in that area. Active transport is really important. The safety-related projects, nearly $64 million, saving lives and stopping serious injury. $43 million on the electric trains. You look under water supply, and equally you see, you know, the Central Interceptor, which will transform stop the waste going onto our beautiful beaches, particularly in the Western Isthmus area. 197 million going in there. Wastewater, another 377 million in that area. Stormwater, 90 million. You look at parks and community, $50 million worth of new acquisitions. So are we doing things as a council despite the challenge of losing $500 million in income? And the answer is yes. And I think we can be proud of what we have sustained and what we've kept going, because we are using investment in capital works to generate economic recovery and to create new jobs at a time we desperately need it. So here we are at the end of COVID, not at the end of COVID-19, partway through COVID-19, fearful that what has happened in Melbourne, what has happened in countries around the world, that, you know, Hong Kong at the moment, Israel at the moment, that once had a proud record like New Zealand's, we have maintained that record. And we know there's been an economic cost, and we know that the next budget and the long-term plan and the 10-year budget will be about economic recovery, but we're starting it in this budget because we are investing that $2.57 billion in things that this city needs, that will be enduring legacies for this city and that will create jobs. So I commend this budget to the council. I think we've worked long and hard. I want to thank everybody for their professionalism, for their collective input, for their collaborative relationships in reaching the point that we have here. But we can go out from this budget with our heads held high, saying we've never faced a tougher challenge, but we faced up to it and we did the right thing. So a big thank you from me to our staff, but also to our local boards and to everybody around this table for your contributions. I'm going to put the recommendations now. I have had a councillor that wishes her vote to be noted against Resolution B. That's Councillor Fletcher, but I haven't had a call for a division. If there's no division called for, I will do it on the voices. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare that carried without dissent, other than the noting by Councillor Fletcher of her concern about Resolution B. Thank you very much for that. Can I just call a 2-minute break while I have a quick chat to people at the back of the room who want to have a brief comment with me. So we'll resume in 2 minutes, which gives you time